Duarte. I'm a respiratory physician with a background on public health and health economics and secretary of ERS Assembly 10 on respiratory infections. I want to start to inform you that this session is being recorded. We will have time for questions, so please place your questions on the chat and we will try to address them all. And we'll start our session. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you at this World TB Day event. And I am delighted to introduce you our first speaker. He's a member of the European Parliament from Portugal and co-chair of the MAP Lung Health Group and a medical doctor from Portugal. Dr. Manuel Pizarro, I welcome you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Raquel. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this initiative. I want to thank the European Respiratory Society, the Global TB Caucus, and the TB Europe Coalition for organizing this very important event. The latest WHO ECDC report on tuberculosis surveillance and monitoring in Europe 2021 shows that the TB burden in the WHO European region as a whole is decreasing and is down 19% overall for 2015-2019. Well, this is important, but we should not believe that TB is a disease of the past. TB continues to be one of the leading infectious killers with 20,000 deaths in the WHO European region and 1.4 million globally in 2019. In addition, it's feared that the COVID-19 pandemic has set back progress in the fight against TB, both globally and in our European region, in particular with regard to resistant strains of TB known as MDR-TB or XDR-TB. Overall, in our European region, every third pulmonary TB patient has the drug-resistant form of TB. Moreover, 70% of the world's XDR-TB patients live in the European region. In spite of universal access to anti-TB drugs, treatment outcomes for drug-resistant TB in the region remain suboptimal. Only 59% of MDR-TB cases notified in 2017 were successfully treated, and for XDR-TB cases in 2016, treatment success is only 43%. Unsuccessful treatment is one of the key factors driving resistance. Negative impacts of current pandemic have already been observed in TB services, including testing, treatment, and prevention. Notifications in high-burden countries indicate that fewer people have been tested and that people with undiagnosed TB are not receiving treatment, which may lead to dramatic increase in TB infection and deaths. Well, we must address that. It's time to act now. In recent years, in 2018, the first ever United Nations General Assembly high-level meeting on tuberculosis put us an objective. In March 2019, the Lancet Commission on Tuberculosis concluded that a TB-free world was a realistic objective. But we have to work on that. We must call the European institutions to action. We must, first of all, increase EU funding. EU programs to improve health systems resilience and bolster R&D, such as EU for Health and Horizon Europe, should fund projects aimed to maintain the progress towards ending TB and mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on TB services. Secondly, we should increase global funding. This is a global fight against tuberculosis, and we cannot think about that only in an European perspective. In third place, we should improve global access to vaccines and treatments. Political leaders and relevant multilateral agencies should promote and ensure global access to medicines, vaccines, medical equipment, and R&D to face not only COVID-19, but also other infectious diseases such as TB and resistant TB. In fourth place, we should reaffirm political commitment. This is essential. The European Union should reaffirm its commitment to the targets agreed in the political declaration from the United Nations level meeting on TB in 2018, as we need to strengthen, now more than ever, international ties and global cooperation. In fifth place, and that, for instance, we should leverage COVID-19 responses. Countries should leverage COVID-19 responses and recovery programs to maintain and improve TB service. For example, in the field of diagnostics, active case finding, contact tracing programs, and digital health tools. Delays to put these recommendations into practice will only make the TB response more costly in the long term. We can use the political leadership from the COVID-19 response to reestablish the momentum built in 2018 on TB. This is only with global solidarity, political leadership, and massive resource mobilization in both R&D and public health that we will be able to end TB as a global public health threat. We can defeat TB. First of all, we need the support and the counsel of the scientific community. That's for that reason that for me it's a pleasure to be host for such an important meeting. Let's hear the scientific council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Manuel Pizarro, for the inspiring speech. Our next speaker, Baroness Suti, member of the UK House of Lords and co-chair of the Western Europe region of the Global TB Caucus. She cannot attend the event today, but she sent a recorded video message to present the Global TB Caucus Network. So let's see the video.
Hello, my name is Baroness Alison Sutty, and I'm a member of the British House of Lords. I'm also co-chair of the Western European region of the Global TB Caucus. I'm delighted to be able to send you this message today because I worked for 10 years in the European Parliament as a policy advisor, and I therefore understand just what a positive impact your work can make. I'd like to tell you a little bit today about the work of the Global TB Caucus. We are a global network of parliamentarians that work both collectively and individually towards ending the TB epidemic. We believe that the main obstacle to ending the tuberculosis epidemic is the lack of political will. Caucus members therefore work with both civil society and their governments to advocate for increased government resources and improved policies dedicated to eradicating tuberculosis. There are several commitments that our members make, including committing to working inclusively across geographical and political divides, to engage with civil society and to confront the stigma and subsequent social isolation all too often associated with the disease. Tuberculosis is a global challenge which requires international action on a mass scale. This requires us to raise the profile of the disease in our parliaments, including in the European Parliament. Our active participation and engagement can have such a positive impact. In 2018, at the UN high-level meeting on tuberculosis, governments agreed to a series of ambitious targets to ensure that the Sustainable Development Goals were met. And since then, as a result of the disruption caused by COVID-19, the Stop TB Partnership estimates that progress to end TB has been set back by as much as 5 to 8 years. A critical factor in ending the tuberculosis epidemic, and the focus of this event today, is increasing research and investment for tuberculosis. At the UN high-level meeting, governments committed to mobilising sufficient and sustainable financing for tuberculosis research and development, with the aim of increasing overall investments to $2 billion. The EU and European countries have a hugely important role to play in ensuring funding for this life-saving research to make sure that it is not impacted by the COVID pandemic, while continuing to support Europe's TB research community and valuable global partnerships. To achieve the targets agreed, the response must be sustainable, collaborative and multi-sectoral. World TB Day is an excellent opportunity to raise awareness about TB at the national, regional and global levels. We as parliamentarians have a crucial role to play in holding our governments to account, to achieve the ambitious targets previously agreed upon, and to call for greater funding for TB research and development. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted to us all what can be achieved in such a short space of time, if you have sufficient political will. Within Europe, we must harness the incredible interests currently being shown in global health issues, ranging from pandemic preparedness to antimicrobial resistance and research and development, and urge our governments to apply this interest to the TB epidemic globally. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you great success with your event today.
Thank you so much. Very good video. Our next speaker is Suvanand Sahu, Deputy Executive Director at Stop TB Partnership, and will give us some insights on TB and COVID-19, European opportunities and challenges. Suvanand, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I bring greetings from the Stop TB Partnership on this World TB Day. I have a slide set, if that can be projected. I can go through the slides. So I just briefly wanted to tell you about what happened with TB in the last few years and how the COVID pandemic influenced what the progress was. So if you look at this slide, as was mentioned, the UN high-level meeting resulted in a very bold political declaration committed to by all world leaders. There were some important targets there. As you can see in this slide, some important treatment targets. Between 2018 to 2022, 40 million people have to receive TB treatment, 3.5 million children with TB, 1.5 million MDR TB, about 115,000 children with MDR TB, and 30 million people to receive preventive TB treatment. These are bold targets, and you can see there the part which is in blue is the progress that was made in 2018 and 2019 out of the 5-year target. So the world was moving there, and we considered the UN high-level meeting as a turning point. However, if you see the funding that was available, which is on the right side on the slide there, only half of the committed funding was available. As was mentioned, for research and development, the world committed 2 billion per annum, but less than 1 billion is available. For TB care and prevention, 13 billion per annum, 13 billion, and less than half is currently available. You can see also there good progress made on reducing the number of people who are missing out on treatment and care. Now, if you go to the next slide, in 2020, that was up to 2018-19, that's progress. 2020, we had this pandemic of COVID on an ongoing epidemic, and we can also call it a pandemic of tuberculosis because it affects the whole world. And there you see the number one cause of death from a single infectious agent was tuberculosis for a number of years. For the first time in 2020, COVID overtook that. But if you look at global fund eligible countries, the low and middle income countries, TB deaths still outnumber COVID deaths. if you look at 2020 data. So next slide, please. On the next slide, so here you see the data available in India. Why India? Because we all know that COVID data is live, and we are hit with news which says today so many cases, so many deaths. In TB, we hear it after a year, after more than a year which is passed. But India is the only high TB burden country where we already have on the public domain a real-time information system that gives you the TB notification. This is the graph you see, a dramatic fall in the TB notification. That means less people got diagnosed and treated for TB immediately after the lockdown started, 70% fall, and then there was a recovery. It is still recovering, but not yet at the same level as pre-COVID. Other countries, similar situation happened, but we didn't have the data. Now, if you go to the next slide, please. So we looked at the India data, the initial data, because it was available, and we put together the best minds in the world to model what will happen to the world if this happens across all high TB burden countries. And this is a modeling work that was done by Stop TB Partnership, USAID, and Imperial College, Avenue Health, and Johns Hopkins. This predicted that 6.3 million additional people will get TB in the next 5 years, and 1.4 million additional deaths will happen in the next 5 years. And this will set us off 5 to 8 years behind in the global fight against TB. Now, this was predicted in May 2020. Now, next slide. We looked at country data from the high priority, about 23 countries we looked into it. And we found that 9 of the countries that are worst affected, that account for 60% of the global TB burden, there's a huge drop, 23% drop in the TB notification. We also found similar drops in MDR TB notification, more in Asia. And this is huge. If you look at this data and you extrapolate it, if this would have happened in the whole world, about 20% drop, we would go back to levels of case detection, which was last seen in 2008, 12 years behind. So that's why Stop TB Partnership did a media briefing, and we published these figures because the world has to know and act against it. Next slide, please. This year, 2 important reports came out related to the UN high-level meeting. One was issued by the UN Secretary General, which you can see on the slide on the left side, and the other was a complementary report issued by the TB-affected communities called Deadly Divide. In both the reports, there is a call there. The UNSG report says, ensure that TB prevention and care are safeguarded in the context of COVID-19 and other emerging threats. The TB-affected community goes further ahead and calls for leveraging COVID-19 as a strategic opportunity to end TB. And in that direction, let me just tell you a few things in the next 2 slides, please. The next slide, please. Now, there are many things in common between COVID and TB, perhaps more than we think. If you look at how the 2 diseases manifest, the mode of transmission is the same, airborne. The symptoms are similar, cough and fever, very commonly, and it affects the same organ of the body, the lung. If you look at the responses, testing, tracing, masking, isolating, airborne infection control, all are things that are needed for TB as well as COVID. Now, if you go to the next slide, what we should be thinking about now is how do we respond to both the airborne infections in such a manner that we use that to be prepared for the next pandemic. There are predictions about the next pandemic. Very likely the mode of transmission of a huge pandemic in the future is going to be airborne. And whatever we develop now against TB and COVID is going to be very useful in preventing airborne pandemics in the future. So what are the key elements? Some suggestions here. Screening and testing. We saw how the world did large-scale screening and testing, even outside the health system. This is what is needed in TB. Lots of people are currently missing from care. We have the technology which can do both tests there. Some countries are implementing what is called a bidirectional test. testing the symptomatics for both diseases. We have these technologies which are now available, imaging technologies which are digital X-rays, which are ultra portable, handheld with artificial intelligence readouts that help in screening people in the community in mobile vans and such settings outside the health system. These are great innovations that will help for any airborne infection pandemic in the future. Contact tracing, very important. I am at my home here in Switzerland, a rich country. Switzerland said at some point in December that we have lost the capacity to contact trace for COVID. And you are to trace your own contacts if you happen to get COVID positive. So if this is the situation in a rich country, let's imagine a country in Africa and Asia dealing with TB contact tracing. We haven't built the systems in the past, which now have to be built for the future, using TB and COVID as the pathfinder there. Real-time data, I made the case for India. We need to see more investment there for other countries. Otherwise, you're planning and responding in dark. Models of care, we saw interesting ones emerging: home-based care, telemedicine, digital tools, and all this lifestyle changes of social distancing, masking. This all will help in TB, COVID, as well as other airborne infections in the future. And very important, because a lot of activities happened outside the health system involving communities. The investment in community health system is very important. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. I wanted to conclude by saying that the clock is ticking. In 2023, there will be a UN high-level meeting again to review the commitments very soon. There has been progress in 2018 and 2019, but we have been pushed back in 2020. How do we recover, but also go faster and achieve those targets? The challenge here is what has happened in 2020, but what we need to do urgently is to recover. And for recovering, we have noticed two important things. And in this context, I would like to highlight that financing is very important and political commitment is very important. Countries where politicians, heads of government were committed for TB, we saw some recovery, for example, in India, where the Prime Minister also talked about it. In some countries where political commitment is not there, we didn't see that. Financing is also very important. So in some countries, the domestic funding for TB got cut, and there we had a setback. We need more funding, definitely for recovering. And there is an opportunity to build back better and smarter, and to develop and prepare the world for the next pandemic, very likely to be airborne infection. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Savanand Sahu. We clearly have opportunities and challenges to face in the near future that we should be aware of. And it's now time to introduce you our next speaker, Suraj Madhuri, US and Global Health Policy Director at Treatment Action Group, TAG. And we will hear about missing tools, the current financing landscape, considering the impact of COVID-19. Dr. Suraj Madhuri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Duarte. To the esteemed MEPs, and thank you for the invitation to present today. Again, I'm Suraj Madhuri. I'm the U.S. and Global Health Policy Director with Treatment Action Group. And in my presentation, I'll be sharing insights on the European financing landscape for TB research and development opportunities and the continued need for better diagnostics treatments and vaccines. Next slide, please. So before I begin, I just want to acknowledge the work of my colleagues at TAG who are listed here, and they contribute to this presentation and continue to fiercely advocate for addressing the gaps for TB R&D. And this presentation builds on their critical work in this space. Next slide, please. So I begin by sharing an excerpt of an opinion article published in the BMJ in August 2022. So this is well into the COVID-19 epidemic this past summer. During this time, governments committed massive amounts of resources and contracting to expedite R&D as the world came to a halt to address the escalating COVID-19 crises. The European-based authors and scientists of this article bravely put a spotlight in the shift of finite R&D resources to COVID. warning of an eventual disparity that would throw R&D efforts off track for these disease areas. So if you can see that highlighted quote, as a person who works in policy, I tend to read things very closely, and I just couldn't ignore that tuberculosis was listed in research that's threatened by COVID, and it's listed first within amongst HIV and malaria. Simply put, the needs are so great, and the gap in TB R&D remains much more tenuous, that there's a real concern that TB R&D would be further under-resourced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. And the authors of the article are actually not wrong at all. So TAG conducted a preliminary investigation into the exact impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on TB research. And by doing so, we interviewed principal investigators that oversee large-scale clinical trials for TB. And as we were talking to a lot of these principal investigators, the on-the-ground impact of COVID became much more apparent. So I won't discuss all the impacts in detail, but you can see some of them listed across all the areas in which TB R&D was affected at the ground level within these clinical trials. But I'll actually highlight a few just to sort of describe them in detail. I also encourage everyone to visit the link below to access a policy brief for more information. And it is also available in several languages, including some European languages. So what we discovered was that many TB clinical trials stopped enrolling due to national lockdowns and travel restrictions. So there have been well-documented supply chain disruptions, for example, made it difficult for the importation of study drugs in some cases. Airspace restrictions made it much costlier to transport lab specimens out of trial sites to central labs that are actually located in another country. So in sum, we really saw problems multiply across TB research studies, which would only add to the gap of TB R&D resources to mitigate the effects of COVID. And it would also extend the time horizons to realize new public health tools for TB that these clinical sites were studying. Next slide, please. So what are the gaps in tools? So TAG publishes an annual report tracking TB R&D investments and is one of the most comprehensive resources available on establishing where current R&D spending is across research categories and aligning it with the global plan's 5-year target. As you can see, the gaps are present across all areas of research tracked by TAG. In terms of diagnostics, we need more rapid, sensitive, simplified tests that can be delivered at the point of care and used to detect TB amongst hard to diagnose populations, including children. In terms of treatment, we need shorter, safer, and more tolerable and forgiving regimens. Current regimens require about 4 to 7 drugs taken daily for 6 to 20 months. We also need an effective vaccine, and currently funded research indicates that we may be closer to this than we think. But we need to keep that research well-funded and sustained. So next, what I'll do is I'll give some insights on the current landscape of TB R&D spending and where countries in Europe stand. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we have ranked the top funders of TB R&D. And as you can see, public funders designated by the letter P remain the biggest donor of TB R&D efforts. So the EU and UK funders rank within the top 15, with DFID leading the way, and then the EDCTP. Followed by them further down the list is the MRC and the European Commission. What's troubling here about this ranking are actually the trends. So we do see some gains in some of the public funders in the EU and the UK, designated by the green arrow on the right of your screen. But we see a drop in resources across the European region between 2019 and 2018. And so we see that with the red arrow. This essentially is a wash. However, the concern here is that we still haven't accounted for COVID-19 shifting these resources. So as the authors had forewarned in that BMJ article, we're bracing for a potential drop in EU resources for TB R&D in our next reporting cycle. Next slide, please. So the challenge before all the policymakers that are attending this briefing today is, how do we meet this vision that was set by the political declaration that didn't assume another crippling pandemic would overwhelm public health and financing in what is already a crisis with TB? So at TAG, we actually have a proposal. Next slide, please. So here's a proposal. Recognizing that overcoming the annual $2 billion funding gap would require a concerted demonstration of political will, TAG devised a methodology which would allow countries to contribute their fair share to collectively address the funding gap. Basically, we took the amount of R&D spent by countries and applied a formula, finding that if countries simply took 0.1% of the annual spending in R&D that they already commit, and then commit that towards TB, we would effectively reach the 5-year spending target. I should note that some countries have laudably reached their fair share target, such as the UK government, for example, which reached their target at 139%. Others are nearly there and would require just a doubling of current investments, such as Ireland or Norway. I should note here that investments labeled European Union are not a sum of individual what individual member states spend, but instead a tally of common EU mechanisms such as the European Commission and the EDCTP. So such an approach like this encourages collaboration, resource mobilization, and diplomacy towards chipping away at a global crisis that predates COVID-19. It ensures that no single country is saddled with the bulk of R&D spendings. It spreads the risk. It makes use of R&D spending that's already committed by governments. And such an approach can also be catalytic. If one country commits, others can follow. We've seen this with the United States. Advocates can applaud governments that are meeting their targets and encourage governments that haven't made investments to consider how little money it actually is. I mean, in some countries, again, it's just a doubling of investments. They're nearly there. But how crucial these contributions can be could be very useful to tackle a global problem and approach it in a way that is a shared diplomatic approach. Next slide, please. So with that, I end my presentation. I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak today. I encourage everyone to feel free to reach out to myself and my colleagues at TAG. I look forward to any other questions and further actions by policymakers in attendance today to support TB-R&D. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maduri. We heard about the importance of political commitment, definitely. We now have 5 minutes for open discussion. Place your questions on the chat box. But we now have a very good question from Christina Kurmanu from EFA. And I would ask both speakers, Dr. Maduri and Dr. Saou, to give us a short answer, 2 minutes, not more than that. And the question is, could the massive investments into COVID-19 research also benefit TB and MDR-TB research? And for example, in the field of digital technology, artificial intelligence, contact tracing apps, digital chest X-rays, can we profit from these investments into COVID-19 research? 2 minutes, answers, please. Dr. Saou, do you want to start?
My answer is yes. Investments on COVID research can benefit TB, but it has to be planned that way. It will not happen by default. And the areas that are common and we should focus on is number one, diagnostics, the laboratory diagnostics, which we have common platforms which can diagnose both TB and COVID. Also imaging techniques like X-ray and other imaging techniques with artificial intelligence, digital tools, contact tracing tools. These are very important. I also believe that the research that has been done on COVID vaccine could benefit TB by fast-tracking the TB vaccine research. We have 14 candidate vaccines in research mode for years or maybe decades on TB. And if the science and the way the advanced commitments were made can be thought through, it will benefit TB vaccine research also. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahuri.
Thank you. And just to build on Sahu's points, one, I would also say that COVID-19 can actually benefit from TB research as well, because the TB research field has been so well developed, and essentially the sort of similarities in disease, that there could be a lot of applications from TB to COVID-19 research. So by also investing in TB research, you would also be impacting the COVID-19 epidemic. The other thing I would add, just on top of the benefit around vaccines, TB vaccines could definitely benefit from COVID-19 science, both in terms of borrowing from the innovative trial design and administration, and also studying novel platforms such as mRNA TB vaccines. So BioNTech in Germany, for example, actually had funding from Gates Foundation to study mRNA-based TB and HIV vaccines before COVID-19 hit. So I believe now, because that we've seen how the world really accelerated the realization of a COVID-19 vaccine in record time, now we can really think about how do we accelerate that work for TB, where we're well positioned to have multiple candidates for TB vaccines. How we apply some of the science that we saw through the COVID-19 epidemic to current vaccine science. And so I think we're in a very good position to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. We could keep on discussing this the whole afternoon, but we have to move forward. And thank you so much. We are now going to introduce our next speakers, and they are both TB survivors. It's very important to hear from the TB patients, the patient's perspective of disease, of the treatment, to hear about their lives. And I welcome Nandita Venkantesan. She's a TB survivor and patient advocate from India, and Maria. I welcome them for the next session, how COVID-19 has impacted people with TB.
Hello, I am Maria. I first wanted to thank you all for this opportunity. And second, I hope that by telling my experience with TB during this chaotic last year, one can understand how difficult it is to deal with not only the disease itself, but how difficult it is to even find out one has TB. It took one whole year to find out I have drug-resistant TB, during which I took countless types of medication. So my experience started when I moved from Romania to Norway in March 2020. And that's when I first started feeling sick. A pressure on my chest, which slowly progressed to coughing. Dismissing it, thought it was only a cold. But after I heard some wheezing sounds, I immediately called and set up a meeting for a doctor at a private clinic. But since visits to the doctor with my kind of symptoms were forbidden due to COVID, I couldn't go to the make a live appointment. So my only option was telemedicine. I have had at least 5 appointments with different doctors, and they all told me I shouldn't be worried because it would go away on its own. Meanwhile, my symptoms were getting worse. On 23rd of March, I had a plane ticket to Romania, but the flight got canceled due to COVID, so I couldn't benefit from treatment at home. In May, I could finally see a doctor face to face. He was certain I had asthma and prescribed me some light medicine, but symptoms remained the same. In the middle of June, I got an x-ray done after finishing the treatment with antibiotics. And when the doctor saw the x-ray, he told me it looked like a normal post-pneumonia lungs, and I just need to get a CT scan done just to be sure. So he programmed me for a CT scan, but the appointment was set for October, and this was June. On July 21st, I got back home in Romania, took a plane straight from Oslo. On July 22nd, I went to the doctor and was diagnosed with pneumonia, possibly bronchiectasis, and was given 2 weeks of 2 different antibiotics. Started feeling better, but was still coughing. I had several treatments, including more antibiotics, inhaler, and a nebulizer, until the 13th of October, when I had been diagnosed with active TB. I was told I needed to be hospitalized, but due to COVID, there were no available beds in Bucharest, and decided to go to my natal city, since my parents lived there. And on the 14th, I was hospitalized and stayed there for almost 2 weeks, when I was told to go home because they would bring COVID patients. At home, I finished the 2-month intensive treatment medication, and since everything was improving, I was put on the consolidation treatment. During all this time, I stayed at home, and my parents as well. I was scared to catch COVID on top of TB. A couple of days before Christmas, I got a call from the doctor in the hospital, and he told me I was resistant to isoniazid and rifampicin. This was 3 months after I started taking the medication. And the same day we reached the doctor's office and were told we should wait for the results from Bucharest. So I was a new case with already drug-resistant TB. On January 4th, the results came and I was only isoniazid resistant. So I moved back to Bucharest and continued treatment there. On the 4th of February, I received a third result, which confirmed the one from Constanța. I was a new case with already drug-resistant TB. I never had lung issues. Nobody in my family had lung issues. On February 5th, I was hospitalized and started treatment for drug-resistant TB. On the 21st of March, I received my first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. And I am currently looking forward to receiving my second one so I can be able to heal properly, because TB attacked my health and COVID attacked my mental health. So I not only need to heal my body, but my mind as well. And I know I am still lucky because I was able to see so many doctors and to figure and to finally find out what was the cause of what was making me sick. Others I know don't have this luxury. But I do have to say that a faster way should be available to find out if you have TB, and especially if you have drug-resistant TB. So this is my story, and I am still scared, but I have no other option than moving on. So I am now on my third month of drug-resistant TB medication, after already 4 months of sensitive TB medication. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Can we hear now your experience, Nandita?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Absolutely powerful testimony by Maria. I'm frankly choked listening to it. And because I know that this is not one person's testimony, this is exactly what people have gone through last year. They have been through hell and back. TB patients have been through hell and back last year, because we know that the effects of COVID is not just restricted to the disease and the deaths caused by the virus itself, but it's gone really far ahead, and it has affected another infectious disease that affects the lungs, that spreads by air, but that has been woefully neglected, and it's TB. And I am a TB survivor myself. And yes, I had this disease for a very long time. I battled this disease for close to 5 to 6 years of my life. It was a horrendous period for me. And apart from all of that, the fact is that I don't want to make this about myself, but I want to tell you guys exactly what happened last year with TB patients. I uh, I was involved in guiding a lot of TB patients through last year in several places. And it is the fact that the Stop TB Partnership, the report by the Stop TB Partnership, which gives some extremely grim numbers, the fact that 1.4 million fewer people received care last year, and close to 5 lakh people just died because of the fact that they could not receive any form of diagnosis. This is an utter shame, and it's the fact that the health system has let down patients this way. It's a blot, to be honest, and I'm not going to mince words in saying that patients have died last year only because they could not go and access the first step to getting themselves cured, and that is diagnosis. And it all through last year, I know for the fact that whether it is in India, whether India was horribly affected by TB, or whether it is in other countries, for example, there was little access to the newer drugs, for example, bedaquiline and delamanid, which are used for treating drug-resistant form of the illness. Patients could not travel to their clinics. Many doctors refused to see them, exactly similar to what Maria was saying, because the symptoms were very similar to COVID. And it's a fact that TB patients face a lot of stigma around the illness because of the fact that it spreads through air, and the stigma got all the more compounded last year because the symptoms were very similar to COVID. And apart from that, and the hit, what the hit on it was on the hit of COVID on TB was in every aspect, whether it was accessing diagnostics, whether it was accessing medicines. I myself know of someone who passed away last year simply because he could not get access to a very critical life-saving drug last year. Despite doing the rounds of several government clinics, etc., he could not get access to it, access to a medicine named Delamanid. Uh, and anything, if anything, COVID has taught us, and it has taught me, it is the fact that we all should know that a disease can start at one place and it takes no time to spread to other places. And that's exactly what TB is. TB, no country today can say that we don't care about TB. No country can say that we are not going to do anything for TB, because you never know how a disease can transpire. It can start at one place, it can spread to other countries, and it can cause absolute havoc. It's really time that I hope that COVID teaches us lessons not to neglect other diseases. It comes at a very grave cost to people. I personally want that if I have to give my one big takeaway of what I wish to see a change in TB, is that I want far more investments to be done in TB vaccines. I'm astounded by the fact that it just took 1 year for everyone to come together and produce a vaccine for COVID. I'm absolutely not downplaying at all the importance of COVID. No way, I'm not doing that. COVID is horrendous and it's bad for people who go through it. But if this is the sort of political will and collective action we could see in an equally dangerous disease, I'm sure we can do wonders. And I want that this should be the big takeaway from whether me speaking or Maria speaking. I don't want that we go away just feeling inspired or just feeling happy about yourself by me and she sharing our story. I want concrete action after this, because I don't want that, none of us, both of us don't want that we see such awful and ghastly numbers in the coming years. So please put on your investments into TB vaccines. Please let's push the pedal on the gear, and it's time to do something about it. I sincerely hope that our clarion call goes out to all of you, and truly something important transpires out of this meeting.
Thank you, Nandita. Thank you both Nandita and Maria. We heard about the delay in diagnosis due to COVID, but also due to lack of awareness for TB. Maria described the delay in the drug-resistant results, delay to provide adequate treatment, and it is so important to hear from your experience. It's so important to hear the patient's perspective. And this expression from Maria and Nandita is still ringing in my head. I've been in hell. You should not have been in hell. I hope, Maria, you are getting better now that you are on the proper treatment regimen. And I'm going to ask you, both of you, one question, and I will ask you for a short answer, please, 2 minutes each. But imagine you have the EU and national leaders, okay, in front of you. What is your main message? What do you want to tell them about this lesson on COVID-19 and TB? You have them in front of you. You have 2 minutes to tell them what is in your mind. Who wants to start? Maria.
Going to tell them that it would be much, much better to act while there is still some control. And now we still have some control. We just don't have to let it slip under our fingers, just like COVID did. During COVID, the COVID crisis, all countries worked together on finding solutions as fast as possible. Why shouldn't we do this for TB and for other diseases that require our attention, require us? We just have to get involved and do this together. That's my take.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
Nanita.
I concur with Maria, and if I have to pinpoint to one aspect in TB care that I think right now needs attention is vaccines. We need a longer term solution to this problem. The fact is that we are using a 100-year-old BCG vaccine, which is an absolute waste. I took the BCG vaccine as well. And I know that I may sound harsh, but yes, a lot of us have taken the vaccine, but yet we fell prey to TB, which does say that we need, the vaccine has had its run, and it's time that we need newer vaccines to combat it. So yes, more investments in vaccines, TB vaccines, and access to the newer drugs. As someone pointed out here, that there are a lot of MDR and XDR TB patients in EU as well. So definitely stronger access to bedaquiline, delamanid for the drug-resistant TB patients, and investments in vaccines. These two are my key points.
Thank you, Nandita. And I hope we will all echo your messages, and our world leaders have to hear you. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experiences. It's now to move on, and I'm going to introduce you the next speaker, Scott Wool, Senior Specialist, Parliament Affairs at Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria. And we are going to talk about how to accelerate the end of TB and HIV as epidemics. Scott Wool, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Raquel. I have a presentation with a few slides I'd like to show. And if we can begin with the second slide in that deck. And I'd like to start by, first of all, thanking Maria and Nandita for sharing their stories, and especially for the emphasis that they placed on the need for increased investments in TB going forward. I'd also like to thank the Lung Health Group for convening today's session, as well as the Global TB Caucus and all of the partners who were involved in organizing this. Thank you for inviting the Global Fund. I do like to take opportunities like this to begin by expressing our gratitude to the European Parliament, European Commission, and all of the EU member states for the very important role that you have played in supporting the Global Fund over the years. In 2019, we had our 6th replenishment, and we were able to raise over $14 billion for the 3-year grant cycle that started last year in 2020. And the European Commission was the 6th largest donor overall. But if you look at the EU member states combined, they represent nearly half of our overall funding. And on a related note, we had a very significant increase from Portugal in the 6th replenishment as well. And I know that Raquel played a major role in securing that pledge. So thank you to her as well. And if we could move on to the next slide, because of that success, we're able to allocate over $4 billion every year. We provide about 73% of the international financing for the global TB response. And if I can move to the next slide. Those investments over the past 20 years since the Global Fund was created have produced significant impact, particularly leading up to last year when COVID struck. 2019 is the last year that we have complete data for. That's an issue in and of itself that some previous speakers have identified. At any point last year, anyone with access to the internet could get current up-to-date data for COVID-19. For TB, we'll have to wait many more months into the second half of 2021 before we have complete data for 2020. But the 2019 data shows that we had 5.7 million people receiving treatment for TB in the countries where the Global Fund operates, over 100 countries around the world. That represents an increase from 48% treatment coverage in 2010 to 65% treatment coverage in 2018. So a trend line, still a lot of work to do, clearly, but a trend line that was moving in the right direction. And if we could move to the next slide, we saw something similar in terms of reducing the number of missing cases, which, as all of us know, is a major priority identified in the political declaration from the UN high-level meeting on TB. We had an initiative that we started in the last 3-year grant cycle and that we have continued and expanded to 20 countries in the current grant cycle, focused on adding additional funds beyond normal country allocations to accelerate TB case finding. And those 20 countries combined represent 82% of missing cases worldwide. So if we move to the next slide, you can see this is another area where we have trend lines moving in the right direction, from an estimated 52% missing cases in 2010 down to 34% by 2018. If we move to the next slide and we drill down region by region, you can see on this slide, the black lines represent increasing TB case notification, and they're generally moving in the right direction. If you focus in on the Asia Pacific region on the far right of the slide, as we all know, we have many of our highest TB burden countries in the Asia Pacific region, and you see TB case notifications moving up at a pretty significant pace in recent years. And importantly, you see the gap between case notifications and estimated cases shrinking down to about 27% as of 2018. And if we move to the next slide, this slide has a lot of information on it, but it essentially delivers the same message, that we had trend lines moving in the right direction before COVID hit in terms of reduced TB incidence and reduced TB deaths. So if we move to the next slide, as all of us know, COVID has had a significant impact on all of this. The Global Fund did respond quickly and early in 2020. We allocated over the course of the year in 2020 nearly $1 billion to 106 countries around the world for their COVID response. If we move to the next slide, and this is my final slide, I have a few more points to make, but this is my last slide. It shows that those funds primarily went to 4 key areas. One was to help countries directly fight COVID with tests, treatments, medical supplies. Another area is protecting frontline health workers, both in formal health systems and community health workers in informal systems with personal protective equipment, for example. Reinforcing systems for health, again, including community health systems, and then funds specifically to adapt TB as well as HIV and malaria programs so that they could continue to sustain during the pandemic. And there are a couple, we also, I should mention, played a leading role in founding what's called the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, the ACT Accelerator, which is a global coalition that came together early in 2020, made up of global health organizations, other partners, and countries around the world, including many EU member states, designed to accelerate the development, the manufacture, the procurement, and the equitable deployment of COVID diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. And a couple key messages that I want to just quickly leave with you. One is that we've talked a lot today about the significant challenges we faced in the past year and the significant challenges that lie ahead. And I certainly don't want to minimize any of those, but there are reasons to be hopeful. These investments that have been made this past year are having an impact. And good examples of that can be found in India and Bangladesh, again, 2 of our highest TB burden countries, where if you look at the first several months of 2020, you saw TB testing really plummet by as much as 70%. But if you look at the second half of the year, there was a real rebound. And in both of those countries, by the end of the year, they had nearly reached their pre-COVID levels in terms of TB testing. We also see really significant opportunities going forward to make investments that will benefit the fights against both diseases. Now, from our perspective, in many respects, we're looking at the same tools, the same health workers, the same health systems, both formal and informal, that need to be strengthened, that need to be invested in. And we've also seen innovations that have come out of the COVID response out of necessity, but that can really benefit our TB response going forward. Things like increased investments in community and home-based care, including multi-month dispersal of medications, increased use of digital technologies in ways that are particularly relevant for TB, like treatment adherence monitoring of side effects. We've seen a more rapid transition to all oral treatment regimens for drug-resistant TB. So the final and key message I want to emphasize is that we really think that this is the time to be accelerating our investments in global health. At the Global Fund, we just got a major boost in that regard in the COVID emergency response bill from the United States that President Biden signed a couple of weeks ago. That included $3.5 billion for the Global Fund. We view that as a major vote of confidence in our ability to deliver funds quickly, efficiently, and with transparency and accountability. But unfortunately, even a number as large as that is only a portion of what will be needed for the course of 2021, both in terms of what the Global Fund needs to do, but also all of our partners in the ACT Accelerator coalition. So we really hope that the European Parliament, the European Commission, all the EU member states will use the very significant influence that you have in both the G7 and the G20 processes to highlight the need to increase investments, both as previous speakers have emphasized, investments that are needed for existing pandemics that are killing people right now, like TB, also HIV and malaria, of course, COVID, but also to prepare us for future threats. It's things that we all know: laboratory systems, community systems, disease surveillance, supply chains, and so forth. So I'll stop there. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, Scott Wool. We hear that there is a lot of work ahead, but there is reason for hope and opportunities in the near future. So we'll come back to you with some questions, but now it's time to introduce the next speakers. I welcome Lisa Gorlitz, Advocacy Officer at DSW, an international development and advocacy organization working on global health and TB, among other areas, and Hanu Lang, Policy Officer at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation, European Commission. And they will talk about the research and development solution. So the floor is yours. Lisa, please.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. I learned already a lot today, and this is always a great opportunity. So as you said, DSW is a development NGO, and at our core, actually, we work on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and we focus on the largest generation of youth that we've seen on Earth in history. But we also do advocate at the EU level and in Germany for improved and new tools to tackle poverty-related and neglected diseases, including TB, because we believe that, with the current tools we have, the lack of vaccines, the lack of proper treatment options that are also gender sensitive or youth friendly, we cannot reach the Sustainable Development Goal 3 targets related to the poverty-related and neglected diseases. So it's great that you're organizing this event today, and I'm happy to contribute to this. I would like to get back to something that Maria said. I think it was very clear from your intervention, and thank you for sharing how difficult it is to treat TB, especially multi-drug resistant TB. So we really see the need for research and innovation. And we also heard from the previous speaker, Suraj, from the Treatment Action Group, that TB R&D is really under-resourced, and that a little bit of funding that is available is even under further threat now to be further neglected due to COVID. And I think that's why it's important to advocate towards institutions like the European Union, or also the member states of the European Union, who have a tradition, or some of them at least have a tradition in funding poverty-related neglected disease research and innovation, to increase their investments. And the EU actually has several instruments that can help in this regard, and that have made investments in the past and that are quite successful. One was already mentioned before, that's the EDCTP, the European and Developing Countries Clinical Trial Partnership. But I think that we are lucky to have another speaker from the Commission, so Hanno will speak right after me. So I think maybe he's better placed to introduce these instruments that the EU has, but I would like to give a little bit of the civil society perspective on the EU support, because we think it can definitely be increased, the EU support, which is why we welcome very much that the current legislative proposal that was launched, I think exactly 1 month ago, for the future research and innovation partnerships, which include the successor program for the EDCTP, includes an increase of budget for the EDCTP. So the current program phase, it's the second phase of EDCTP, had 683 million contribution from the EC budget, and it's suggested to increase to 800 million under the future partnership program. And that's something that we welcome very much. But we all have to keep in mind that this is only possible if this funding is matched by the participating states, so mainly also European member states of the partnership, but also this time around sub-Saharan African participating states, and also third parties, philanthropies, industry, international organizations that can contribute to the partnership and whose contributions can be matched by the EU funding. So we kind of all have the duty now to motivate member states to really commit to this partnership, to make their commitment public, and also to increase their cash contributions, because a mechanism like this can only really fulfill its potential if it can act as a pooled funding mechanism, and if it's not just everybody continues doing funding their research initiatives and putting it under one label, but really pooling resources and expertise. And I think EDCTP has done a great job, and there are a number of success stories already on new treatments or new guidelines for treatments on poverty-related and neglected diseases, including for TB. But I think, as most of you know, even with 800 million or matched by the contributions from member states, we cannot get very far because especially late-stage clinical trials are very expensive. So I think next to EDCTP or other instruments that the EU has to support research and innovation for PRNDs, including TB, has to be really strengthened. So for example, there can be support under the 2-year work programs of the Horizon Research and Innovation Framework Program. That's usually more early stage research. And in the past, the so-called Innovative Medicines Initiative has also supported TB research. And under the new partnerships, there might be an opportunity for synergies between different partnerships. So we hope, for example, that the future IHI, the Innovative Health Initiative, and the future EDCTP3 maybe could collaborate on TB, because TB is an area where IMI has worked on in the past, without EDCTP though. So maybe in the future they could work on it together. But that's just me dreaming out loud how the EU could support TB vaccine R&D or TB treatment R&D. I think I cannot stress enough the role of member states, because they will now negotiate in the Council this piece of legislation that will be the basis for these future partnerships. So those organizations who are here and who are based in EU capitals, EU member state capitals, if you have good relationships to your research ministries, you should contact them and ask them to support the successor program of the EDCTP and to commit also to cash contributions. And the European Parliament will also have a report on these partnerships. So also the MEPs who are here can maybe talk to their colleagues, and yeah, we could also maybe touch base afterwards or take some recommendations from today's event to feed into this report of the European Parliament, even though unfortunately I think it will not have a legal say in it, but at least the Parliament will be able to express its views on these research and innovation partnerships that hopefully can support and help bring about better solutions against TB. Yeah, I think that's almost it from my side. As from DSW, I think on this TB day I would just say one more thing, because it tends to be forgotten, or yeah, because I think in countries where HIV is also endemic, TB incidence tends to peak among adolescents and youth, and also in the COVID pandemic we tend to look at older populations because the health impact is more severe. But I would just like to remind us about the impact that the pandemic has had on young people, not so much in terms of health outcome, but really destroying livelihoods or lives, taking away the youth, the young years, and just remind ourselves that TB can have a similar burden on young people. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Heino Lang.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important event. So I have a couple of slides. So in my presentation, I will give you a brief overview what the Commission is doing to support TB research through its current framework program Horizon 2020. Next slide, please. So if you put TB first in the context of poverty-related and neglected infectious diseases, so this is an area that in itself is quite challenging. And if you put those diseases into Horizon 2020, the overall big program, you can see that there are a lot of opportunities and possibilities for seeking funding for research into these diseases. But on the other hand, it can also be challenging because it might be that the scientific community is not competitive enough to compete against other areas or more advanced areas of research. So, but I would say that luckily in TB, we have a quite strong scientific community in Europe that can put together very strong proposals, and they have several instruments to choose from. But on the other hand, we can say that like there's no priority for these diseases in the overall program. So we have seen in one of the societal challenges, which is for health, that we need to have a priority kind of for these diseases, and that's what we have been actually doing for the last 15 years, also in previous programs. So that we aim to bring together a critical mass of scientists who can work together, and they can then address specifically product development, because this is what we need for TB. We need new vaccines, drugs, and diagnostics. Next slide, please. So we, some time ago, or actually quite a long time ago already, we made the kind of strategy how the different Commission funding instrument can support research in these areas like TB. And of course, there needs to be, first of all, fundamental research, grants to individual scientists. But then we see very important the role of collaborative research, where we fund these consortia and bring them together to start discovery work and early clinical and preclinical work on these drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics. And then after that, our partnerships that we have established, like the EDCTP and the Innovative Medicines Initiative, can kind of continue the work. And of course, then when we go further in the pipeline, in the product pipeline, it gets more and more expensive. I mean, the cost increase dramatically. So that is one of the problems, that when we come to like phase 3 clinical trials, it's always, shortage of funding, and one funder alone has a lot of difficulties to cover all these costs. So here I would emphasize the global collaboration that is essential in this process. Next slide, please. So the EU support to TB research has been, I think, quite good for the last 15 years. And we are funding fundamental research because that is always needed to kind of fill up new ideas and new concepts for the pipeline. But then we are focusing really on delivering the new tools to combat TB, focusing on rapid and sensitive point-of-care diagnostic tests, more effective regimens for the treatment of TB, and especially multi-drug resistant TB, and then new safe and effective vaccine candidates. So in Horizon 2020, there was more than 150 million that has been awarded directly to TB research. And then in addition, I want to mention again the EDCTP and then Innovative Medicines Initiative for their contribution. Next slide, please. So both EDCTP and IMI have been really instrumental now during the later stages of funding, because the Horizon 2020 health program has addressed the discovery, preclinical and early clinical stages of product development. And actually, we have been able to deliver a number of new TB vaccine candidates, for example, that are now with EDCTP in phase 2 clinical trials. And on the drug side, the story is a bit the same. There is a really substantial investment from IMI in the form of the antimicrobial resistance accelerator program, where they have a number of products specifically on TB. The last one, I think, has not even started yet, and this will be running for the next 5-7 years. And the total investment in this is half of this coming from the Commission, and then half coming from the industry, and the total investment is about 400 million euros. So I think this is a very good development. Next slide, please. But like I mentioned earlier, so the costs become higher and higher, and the coordination of the activities become in the future even more important. So we know that Horizon 2020 will be followed by Horizon Europe, where we will have again health program, where we will have specific calls supporting TB research and addressing the remaining gaps in the earlier stages of product development. EDCTP2 will be one day Global Health EDCTP3 joint undertaking, and Innovative Medicines Initiative 2 will be Innovative Health Initiative joint undertaking. And like Lisa just mentioned, I mean, at the moment there is negotiations ongoing at the Council, and this will be also presented to the European Parliament. And then at one point, then the legal basis, the Single Basic Act will be adopted, and these undertakings will start operating. And I also would like to, like Lisa, emphasize the importance of the member states' contribution to the new EDCTP, because now it's a time to really tell the member states that they should join this partnership first of all, because not all EU member states are part of this initiative, but they can be if they just so wish. And there is also the possibility to have additional funding from other partners from industry and other funders, and all this funding will be matched by the European Commission. So this would increase the capacity of this partnership, and I see this when we are approaching in TB both drug development and vaccine development, the phase 3 clinical trials, that we need more capacity in these partnerships, and also we need more global coordination of activities. And here I want to mention as an example a global TB vaccine partnership that we have established, and it's a small partnership of forum for funders, national governments, WHO, and PDPs to openly share information about funding of TB vaccines, what can be done, what should be the criteria for selecting vaccines for future, and hopefully this will help to make later one day co-funding decisions and increasing the funding for TB vaccines. So that was all from me. Thank you very much again for being part of this event.
Thank you so much. It was very good. They were very good presentations. I will ask each one of you. We don't have much time. We just have 1 minute or 2 minutes. So 1 minute each. What would be the message that you for member states in order to benefit more from funding and from all the opportunities you presented? 1 minute, very, very short answer. Scott?
I think with just 1 minute, I would emphasize the importance of investments in integrated care. You know, we have examples from around the globe of countries that have successfully integrated aspects of TB as well as HIV and malaria into services that are being delivered for COVID, on things like integrated testing for both diseases at the same time, producing really significant results. And I think that that's going to be again a big part of how we invest in both formal and informal community systems going forward. And I think that's all the time I have.
It was great. 1 minute. Lisa.
Yeah, in addition to that, I would wish for more investments. So we all want more investments, surprise. More investments in research and innovation to have better tools for the treatments not to be so toxic and so complex and so long, and to finally maybe have a full vaccine, and would address myself specifically towards the EU, and even more importantly now to the member states, as you said, that they commit now to the future EDCTP3 and make ambitious pledges, including increased cash contributions to this instrument.
Thank you, Lisa. Hannu?
So my first wish would be the same as Lisa's, so that member states would really contribute to the new EDCTP and also align their own research activities in TB with this new partnership. And then in addition, I would say that it's very good to see that member states are very active in the program committee of the health program. So that is very useful, because that also influences the future topics, and we can make sure that we direct the funds to the right places, and TB will be remembered always.
Thank you so much for this splendid session. In this session today, we had the opportunity of hearing different stakeholders. We heard about the challenges, the opportunities related to tuberculosis, the importance of funding, political leadership, resource mobilization to end TB as a global public health threat. We know the recipe, we just need to do it. I thank all speakers for the splendid presentations. And now it's time to close, and I will give the floor to Manuel Pizarro for the concluding remarks. You are muted.
Now I think it works. Thank you very much, Raquel. I share with you the idea that it was a very, very interesting debate, and I think that it was inspiring in taking the attention on the work that we should do. I want to say some words, especially to Nandita and Maria, that bring to us the experience of the patients and of the suffering of the patients deeply related with the COVID context, which is even more complicated. I think that we should be concerned. That data, which was shared in this meeting, is compelling. There is a very serious impact of COVID-19 pandemic in fight against TB and against resistant TB. We don't speak about the potential impact. We have figures about the real impact. Political leaders should be on board. Acknowledge the situation is the first thing that we need to act. And we really need to act now, immediately. We cannot accept TB as a fatality. If we act now with adequate funding and support, we can recover the delay and take back the way of progress. Political leaders and European institutions should hear the voice of citizens. The vast majority of Europeans want more, much more European Union in the field of health. The ambitious program that we approve in the Parliament, EU for Health, with a 5.1 billion euros budget, should have clear targets towards infectious disease as TB. We must recover and improve services for diagnosed and treat patients and to improve the testing of contacts. We should use other EU programs, as for instance, Horizon Europe or Innovative Health Initiative joint undertaken to fund R&D. Resistant TB must be targeted with priority. We must work together. Political leaders, European and national authorities, scientific community, health professionals, NGOs and citizens. Together, we can defeat tuberculosis. That's our responsibility. Thank you very much for this initiative.
Thank you. And I think it's finished. Thank you all for being here and working with us in order to end TB.